My great-grandma Zuza came to this country from what was then Slovakia, carrying the kind of heavy hope only trauma survivors understand. The hope that the worst is behind you, and the dream of something better ahead. She had lived through the Second World War. The scars weren't just physical. The war tore through every part of life, faith, identity, community. But she survived. That alone was a miracle. Like many who crossed oceans after the war, her family came to America believing that they could build a new life. She settled in Orem, Utah, a quiet town of orchards, unpaved roads, and deeply rooted LDS values. It was a place full of structure, of boundaries, of rules for how to belong. So she adapted. She got rid of her accent, traded goulash for casseroles, sang hymns in English. Not because she was ashamed, but because she knew what survival sometimes requires: silence. She married a man who was born and raised in Utah, and they raised their children to be quote-unquote true Americans. Not one of them speaks her language. Not one of them knows the town she came from. And she wasn't alone. This story, her story, is echoed in households across America, all different on the surface but shaped by the same undercurrent: assimilation as protection, cultural silence as sacrifice. But something is shifting. Today, I scroll through social media and I see people lighting candles their grandmothers once lit, cooking food their ancestors once ate, tattooing names that have fallen out of use. It's not just nostalgia, it's a movement, a cultural reclamation, a reweaving of frayed threads. And it makes me wonder, why are so many of us now reaching for the past when our grandparents were running from it? To understand this generational shift, we need to rewind to a time when assimilation wasn't just encouraged, it was expected, and often reinforced, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly. Post-World War II America was built on the idea of unity through uniformity. The 1950s especially were a decade obsessed with sameness. Picture rows of identical suburban homes with manicured lawns, flagpoles in every yard, and neatly drawn gender roles. Women in pressed A-line skirts hosting bridge clubs and baking tuna casseroles. Men in gray suits carrying briefcases. Expected to provide and protect. This was the glossy magazine cover version of the American dream. One that promised belonging, but only if you played by the rules. The melting pot ideal often meant blending in rather than standing out. Differences, whether in language, dress, or custom, were frequently set aside in the process. The goal wasn't harmony, it was homogeneity. For immigrants like my great-grandma, assimilation was survival. Accents weren't charming, they were liabilities. A slip of the tongue could be the difference between employment and rejection. Children were sent to school speaking Czech or Spanish or Korean and came home with notes from teachers saying, "Only English, please." Sometimes it was blatant. There were stories of schools washing kids' mouths out with soap for speaking their native languages, or of neighbors reporting quote-unquote suspicious families who kept to their traditions. Other times it was more subtle, a constant stream of micro-corrections and silent exclusions. Invitations that never came. Friends who drifted away. The job interview that ended after a handshake. Names were the first to go. Yosef became Joe, and Sochil became Susan. Family names were shortened or simplified to make them easier to pronounce or spell, leading to whole generations that grew up with a version of their names that felt like strangers in their own mouths. Food became another battleground. The smell of kimchi in a lunchbox could draw ridicule. Rice and beans were swapped for Wonder Bread and Jell-O. Holiday feasts filled with ancestral meaning were simplified into turkey and stuffing to match the calendar. And the clothing? Bright colors, intricate embroidery, symbolic fabric, replaced by beige slacks, button-downs, and Sunday best. Hair was straightened, styles were subdued, anything that drew too much attention became a risk. And yet, that erasure wasn't rooted in shame. It was rooted in love, in desperation, in the aching protective instinct to give your children a life where they didn't have to fight just to be accepted. It was the belief, perhaps naive, perhaps pragmatic, that if you could just blend in, maybe your children would have it easier. Who could blame them for making that choice? Imagine carrying the trauma of war, genocide, displacement, the unbearable weight of what you've seen and lost. You come to a new country, and you're told in both ways, loud and quiet, that if you just let go of where you came from, you'll finally be safe. That if you become what they expect, you'll get the job, the house, the normal life. Assimilation was supposed to be the bridge, but for many it became a burial ground. Whole languages fell silent in one generation. Ceremonies faded, family names were forgotten. For many, these changes were seen as the price of security and acceptance. The cost? A fracture, a hollowing, a silence passed down not always in words, but in the spaces between them. The silence of grandparents who don't tell stories. The silence of parents who don't know them. The silence of children who sense the loss but don't have a name for it. It's why some of us grew up knowing our grandparents had accents, but not knowing the language they once spoke fluently. Why we eat spaghetti with ketchup instead of the traditional stew they once simmered. Why we hear names like Miloslav or Bashira or Guadalupe and feel something stir but can't explain why. Because that silence, it echoes. It echoes in our family albums, in our cuisine, in our last names, in the lullabies we never learned. It echoes in the questions we didn't know to ask until it was too late. And now, after generations of hush, hush, and hush, we're finally beginning to hear the reverberation and listen. Not just with our ears, but with our curiosity, our hunger, our reverence. We are listening with intention. As generations passed, that cultural silence began to fray, and now the threads are unraveling fast, sometimes in quiet ways, sometimes in big, public declarations. There's a visible movement, particularly among Gen Z and late millennials, to reclaim what was once left behind. It's in the explosion of language revival TikToks where creators teach words their great-grandparents once whispered. It's in handmade beadwork tutorials going viral, in ancestry test result reaction videos, in cook-alongs recreating pre-colonial meals with grandma in the background. There's a hunger to reconnect, not just intellectually, but physically, emotionally, and spiritually, with something older than the algorithm. This is happening across cultures. Young Maori people in New Zealand are learning Haka and Te Reo in record numbers. Black Americans are tracing their lineage back through the transatlantic slave trade, participating in African spiritual practices once demonized or banned. Palestinian Americans are embroidering their identity onto trees. Jewish communities are resurrecting Yiddish slang and Ladino ballads. Filipino Americans are revisiting Babayan scripts. Everyone is rediscovering what had once faded or been set aside. But here's the twist. This movement lives side by side with another dominant force, the endless scroll of modern consumerism. You'll see someone wearing a centuries-old woven design passed down from their ancestors, standing in line for a Starbucks, holding a phone with a viral Amazon case. People are buying handmade moccasins and knockoff Uggs in the same cart. It's a cultural split screen, tradition and trend, ritual and routine, coexisting in the feed. And that tension is real. Some folks call it inauthentic, others call it hypocrisy. But maybe it's more accurate and more generous to call it a reflection of our fractured, flexible identities. Because today's generation isn't looking to live in one box, we're shapeshifters. The same person who hand paints Slavic folk symbols on Easter eggs might also queue up for the next iPhone release. And why not? We've grown up navigating layers. Many of us are third culture kids, or the children of diaspora, or people who straddle racial, religious, or linguistic lines. We know what it means to code switch, to have one face for grandma and another for Twitter, to pray in one language and joke in another. We live in contradictions. That's our native tongue. We live in a world where it's possible to FaceTime your elder in Oaxaca and learn how to make mole from scratch, and then post it on Instagram with a filter and a hashtag. It's not hypocrisy, it's hybridity. And it's messy, sure, but it's also a testament to our ability to carry the past into the present without setting it down. So what gives? Are we trying to stand out or fit in? Maybe the answer is both, or maybe that binary doesn't apply anymore. Maybe the point isn't to choose between heritage and modernity, but to reclaim the freedom to define ourselves on our own terms. To say yes to ancestral knowledge and yes to electric scooters. To wear regalia and jeans. To use both chopsticks and Chipotle forks. Because for this generation, cultural identity isn't a fixed costume you wear on holidays. It's a living thing. It moves, it evolves, it breathes. And reclaiming it isn't about going back to some perfect unbroken past. It's about salvaging what we can from the impacts of war, migration, and cultural loss, and turning it into something that fits us now. It's permission to remember, permission to remix. And in that reclaiming, in that remembering, we aren't just reviving the past, we're rewriting the future. We're giving the next generation a new inheritance, one that says, you don't have to choose between who you are and who you've been told to be. You can be both. You can be all of it. So what's driving this cultural reclamation now, in this particular moment in history? Why are so many people suddenly hungry for something older, deeper, and more rooted? Why are we spending hours on Ancestry.com learning languages no one around us speaks, cooking from recipe cards written in faded, unfamiliar handwriting? There isn't one single answer, but there are a few powerful undercurrents propelling this shift. First, there's globalization. For decades, globalization promised a more connected world, and in a lot of ways, it delivered. You can buy sushi at a gas station, watch K-dramas in Nebraska, or stream reggaeton hits in Finland. Products, media, fashion, and information are more accessible than ever. But that accessibility came at a cost, a creeping sameness. When trends spread at the speed of light, local flavors get drowned out, regional quirks get ironed flat, culture becomes aesthetic, identity becomes algorithm. A teenager in Texas might be wearing the same fast fashion hoodie as a kid in Tokyo, eating the same viral pasta recipe from TikTok, listening to the same 3 artists recommended by Spotify. On one level, that's beautiful. It's shared experience. But on another, it's disorienting, like being everywhere and no one all at once, like losing your coordinates. Rediscovering your roots in that context becomes an act of defiance, a way of saying, I'm not just a product of the feed, I come from somewhere. I carry something that can't be swiped past. Then there's the internet itself. The irony of digital life is that the same systems flattening our culture are also giving us the tools to recover it. The gatekeepers are gone. You don't need a university degree to learn about your people's history. You don't need a priest or an elder to hand you permission. If you want to learn your ancestral language, you can find lessons on YouTube. If you want to know what your great-grandfather's village looks like now, Google Earth will take you there. You can join diaspora Facebook groups, watch ceremonial dances on Instagram Live, order books in languages you didn't know still existed. The internet, for all its faults, has become a massive digital archive of heritage and a meeting ground for those trying to find their way back to it. And let's not underestimate what we've been through recently. We're all tired. We've just spent years inside a tornado of upheaval, a global pandemic, economic uncertainty, social shifts, and political division. The foundations we grew up trusting, education, hard work, citizenship, have all started to crack. And in that collective exhaustion, we've begun to ask bigger, older questions. Who am I really? Where do I come from? What am I rooted in when the world feels like it's spinning out of control? Those questions don't always lead us forward. Sometimes they lead us back. Back to the lullabies we don't remember but still feel. Back to the stories half told at family gatherings. Back to the scent of a spice we never learned to pronounce. These moments lead us to call our grandparents and ask questions we were too busy or too embarrassed to ask before. They lead us to flip through photo albums, to open dusty recipe books, to cry over songs in a language we don't understand but know in our bones. And finally, there's this. We're ready. Our grandparents couldn't afford to look back. They were too busy surviving, trying to become American, trying to build safety from scratch. Our parents often didn't know how to look back. Their ties had already been loosened or lost. But us, we're in a position they never were. We have the tools, we have the access, and most importantly, we have the curiosity. We're no longer content to inherit culture in fragments. We want to reconstruct the whole picture, even if some of the pieces are missing. We want to reclaim not just to wear or display, but to understand. Because the truth is, roots don't grow unless you plant them. And this generation, we're not just planting them, we're learning to speak them. We're building communities around them. Not because we want to live in the past, but because we want a future with depth, with story, with context. This wave of cultural reclamation is powerful. It's healing, it's inspiring, and in many ways it's necessary. But like anything that surges from the heart of a collective emotion, it's also layered, full of nuance, contradiction, and yes, even risk. On the surface, we're gaining so much. We're not just recovering traditions, we're reimagining them. We're building bridges back to the cultures that raised our ancestors, but we're also using those bridges to build something new. We're learning the songs our great-grandparents forgot. We're tasting the dishes that nearly disappeared into assimilation. We're recovering rituals, rewriting histories, and raising children who know the name of the village their family once fled from. It's not just about identity, it's about inheritance. About looking in the mirror and seeing not just ourselves, but the generations standing quietly behind us. But even beautiful moments have shadows. Sometimes reclaiming culture can become performative. It's easy to buy a traditional blouse on Etsy or post a photo of grandma's recipe with a heritage hashtag. But does wearing the garment mean you understand the story sewn into its seams? Does cooking that recipe mean you knew the meaning behind the spices or the fasting ritual it once broke? There's a risk of reducing heritage to vibes, flattening generations of struggle, story, and symbolism into aesthetic. Culture isn't a costume. It's a responsibility, a relationship, one that demands reverence, study, and truth. Then there's the seduction of nostalgia, the temptation to treat the past as a cozy place to retreat when modern life feels cold or chaotic. But our ancestors didn't live in sepia-toned fairy tales. They endured famine, genocide, forced migration, systemic erasure. The traditions we're reclaiming? Some were practiced in secret. Others were weaponized. Some were never given up, only taken. To honor them honestly means engaging with the pain alongside with the pride. It means asking what was lost and also what was kept alive in spite of everything. There's also the matter of access. Not everyone has the privilege of tracing their lineage. Some families were severed by slavery, colonization, genocide, or displacement. Some grew up in foster care, adopted out of cultural context, or raised with silence where memory should have been. For these individuals, cultural reclamation can feel like piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and no one else remembers the picture. And yet they search, they build, they reclaim. There's so much power in that. Reclamation isn't about perfection, it's about participation. It's about saying, this is mine too, even if it's messy, even if it's painful, even if you're still learning, especially if you're still learning. So where does that leave us? Hopefully somewhere honest, somewhere soft enough to cradle what was broken and strong enough to carry it forward, somewhere that makes room for both ceremony and innovation, for sacredness and change. A place where we don't just reenact culture, we revive it, reinvigorate it, let it breathe. Because reclaiming roots isn't about going backward, it's about finding solid ground to grow from. It's about honoring what came before, understanding what was lost, and shaping what comes next. It's not about purity, it's about presence. It's about showing up in our full humanity and saying, I remember, or even if I don't, I'm trying to. I belong, even if I'm still learning how. I carry this forward, not perfectly, but purposefully. That is what makes reclamation not just a trend, but a revolution of memory, love, and cultural survival. So, why does all of this matter? Because the past isn't just behind us, it's beneath us. It's the foundation we're standing on, even if we've never looked down long enough to notice it. It holds our weight, catches our fall, and whispers to us when we're quiet enough to listen. It's in the recipes we cook without measuring, in the lullabies we hum but don't know the words to. It's the reason we flinch at certain silences or feel peace in the places we've never been. Every decision to reclaim a name, learn a language, wear the clothes, tell the stories, it all adds up to something bigger than nostalgia. It's a declaration. I was not erased. My people were not forgotten. My story matters. This is belonging. This is healing. This is identity stitched back together with gold thread where it once tore. This is the art of meaning making in a world that too often demands we be blank slates. And while this movement towards cultural reclamation isn't perfect and won't look the same for everyone, it reminds us that identity isn't fixed. It's layered. It's evolving. It's not a museum. It's a garden. And like any garden, it needs tending, pruning, watering, and time. We get to participate in it now, not as passive recipients, but as co-creators. So whether your great-grandparents came from Slovakia like mine, or your lineage is tangled in erasure and diaspora, and you're still sifting through the sand for clues, you're not alone in the search. That longing to know who you are and where you come from, it's not frivolous, it's not too late, it's not foolish. It's one of the most deeply human instincts we have, to trace our footprints, to say, I was here, I come from somewhere. And that instinct, it's powerful. It can move mountains. It can resurrect languages. It can bring back dances no one thought would be danced again. It can build new traditions that honor the old while making space for the now. So thank you for being here, for joining me in this remembering. If this episode stirred something in you, something aching, something curious, something hopeful, I hope you'll keep following it, whether that means learning a single word in your ancestral tongue or cooking a meal that smells like home. That first step matters. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening. Leave a rating or review if you're feeling generous. It helps more curious hearts find this space. You can also follow me online at Queen of the Britons. That's QNOTBRITTONS. Just about everywhere. I'd love to hear your story, your rituals, your rediscoveries, your questions. This community is richer with your voice in it. Next time, we're taking a sharp left turn into the shadows. We'll be talking about demonology, haunted histories, and what happens when belief, fear, and folklore collide. From cursed objects to possession myths, it's gonna be a ride. Until then, stay curious, stay grounded, and don't be afraid to look back, because sometimes that's the only way to remember how far we've come and where we're meant to go.